One of the common things that people say about Adventism is, oh, it's a cult. That was a big worry, especially given the church that I came from. From the very beginning, my parents put a lot of, doubt in my head and caution. And coming from an actual cult, that made me, very cautious, and it made me ask a lot of questions. I'm Rachel Beaver. I'm an intern with the communications team at the Carolina Conference. So I grew up in a Christian home, as many people do. The church that I primarily grew up in, it started off okay, but as I got older, I guess things kind of got weird and it became something of a cult. When I was halfway through high school, things at my church got pretty bad, and we ended up leaving. That was a really hard thing for a teenager to go through, because when you're a teenager, you don't really know what to believe anyway. Everything is confusing when you're a teenager. So after that, I didn't go to church regularly for about 4 years. But it wasn't that I didn't try. I tried to go with friends, or I went, a few times where my parents were going, but something would always happen and I wouldn't get to keep going. A couple churches that I was going to closed, or the friend that I was going with stopped going for some reason. It was just kind of one thing after another, and it was really discouraging because it felt to me like God didn't want me. Like I didn't belong anywhere. Every time I tried, it felt like, he just kind of slapped my hand away every time I reached out. My second year into college, I met a guy, and he and I were interested in each other, and we started dating. And I learned that he was an Adventist. So since we were dating, obviously his beliefs were a big part of his life. And if the relationship was going to go anywhere, it had to be something that I was okay with too. So I went to church with him. The concept of Adventism was something very different than anything I'd ever experienced. My parents weren't too crazy about the idea. I didn't really know what to believe. During that time of not going to church, I always felt like something was missing. I was depressed. I wasn't making good choices. I was drinking. I just wasn't the person that I needed to be, the person that I wanted to be. So when he was like, hey, what you doing Saturday? I said, why not? But I was cautious, and I prayed, and I was like, okay, God, if this is something that I need to keep doing, then give me the peace that I'm looking for. And if it's not, then just don't let me feel comfortable. Just give me some kind of feeling, and I'll know to go. I'd never go back. Me and my boyfriend would break up. That was the agreement from the very beginning. So I went, and I expected to have that get out feeling, but I didn't. I felt very welcome. People smiled at me, and I enjoyed the service, and I wanted to go back. I went back, and I went back again, and I continued to go. I feel like normally this is the part where people are like, oh, this is where things started to go right. My parents weren't too crazy about the idea, especially given the kind of church that we came from and the things that you hear about Adventists. They were very cautious. My boyfriend's parents also didn't like me very much. I, for some reason, gave this impression that I wasn't a very wholesome person. His parents would say things about me behind my back to him, and then he would go and tell me what they said. Obviously, their distaste for mine not being an Adventist, but also smaller, seemingly unimportant things like my physical appearance or some just impression I gave. This treatment of me in my relationship kind of confirmed a lot of the stereotypes of Adventism, and it was also something that my parents didn't like very much. Their un-Christlike treatment of me, it didn't really help with the fact that they were still very cautious and not too crazy about me going to church there. It was extremely discouraging, and it was really hard for my boyfriend, to the point where he and I actually pretended to break up. I kept going to church there, but I started acting like I didn't know him that well. I drove by myself on Sabbath morning, I sat by myself in the sanctuary, and I slipped out the door when it was over. All of this was putting a lot of pressure on me to leave, especially in the beginning when I didn't have, anybody to turn to. My boyfriend was supportive, and he still wanted me there. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I want to get out of the room right now, I'm feeling a lot of pressure, I was a 10, probably most of the time. Even though this guy was still my boyfriend, I felt very alone. When I tell people this, they're so surprised. They're like, and you kept going. I can't really explain why I kept going, other than the feeling that I needed to be there. Anytime I felt like maybe I made the wrong choice, something would happen. Someone would say something to me or invite me to do something. It gave me the reassurance that I needed to be there. And so I just kept going. It wasn't until I started doing Bible studies with my associate pastor that I really started to make friends for myself. Eventually, the relationship got to be a bit too much for my boyfriend, and he and I broke up, and I had to still go to Sabbath school afterward, and I tried to act like I was okay. I was really torn up. Until I became closer with my associate pastor and his wife. They were the first people that really just gave me support and told me, God loves you. You're here for a reason. They were really there for me. If it hadn't been for them, I probably would have left. The things that I experienced reminded me of one of the stories in the Bible. The Canaanite woman wanting Jesus to take the demon out of her daughter. I can relate to this woman. The way that it must have felt for people to look down on her, and for even Jesus himself to question her. This woman sought out Jesus because she had heard of what he can do, and she wanted that to be a part of her life too, and that feeling is something that I can relate to. After going years without going to church or having a strong spiritual life, it was something that I wanted, and after feeling like I wasn't good enough, when I finally felt like I was there, I had to keep reaching for it, despite what other people were telling me. So it looked, even from Jesus, it appeared that even he was denying her, which was something that I thought for many years. I thought that God denied me too. But she saw past it. She knew that was something that I had to do too, because I knew there was something deeper. I knew there was something more to be found there. I refused to leave, and I didn't give up because I knew what Jesus could do in my life, and I wanted it. Pretty soon, after a year of Bible studies, I got baptized on June 10th of 2016, and I've been going there ever since. One of the common things that people say about Adventism is, oh, it's a cult. That was a big worry, especially given the church that I came from. And coming from an actual cult, that made me, very cautious, and it made me ask a lot of questions. In Adventism, or even in life in general, there's just certain people that you can't please. But there are people that will be there for you and will support you along the way. Just go wholeheartedly after God, and don't let what anyone else says about you or to you, don't let it get in the way.